welcome back to another part of It's an Inside Job, or How to Grow Yourself Up. So I am going to rely on you guys to do your 5 deep breaths on your own this time, so we can get right into some material today. The other thing is, I say this in class a lot. Repetition is the mother of skill. So you might go, wow, some of these ideas, it seems like we've touched on them in other classes, but we try to keep touching on them in a lot of different ways. So they start like rolling around in your brain and maybe one way of hearing it sticks and another doesn't. So I want you to actually hear this so well and so many times in so many different ways and roll it around in your own brain and question some of the stuff. If there's something you're like, I don't get this part, hopefully soon we'll be able to be back together where I can take those questions and hone in on it better, and we can really make it work. Because again, just like any other skill, and people think a lot of times, oh, well, I should know how to do relationships, right? Or I should know how to do life because, I'm a person, and don't people just know how to do life? It's interesting that how we deal with, especially feelings, is something that we don't really provide a lot of support for in our culture, but then we're supposed to know how to do it. So like any skill, and a lot of these are skills, getting back in touch with your sense of self-worth, it's not just something that happens. There was that book out called The Secret and stuff, and it was almost like sometimes these little, things come by and people think, oh, there's some easy, if I can do this in 5 easy steps. No, it actually takes some good, solid, hard work. So it's a skill, but the more we do it, the better we get. And then you get that muscle memory and it happens more naturally, and then you can do things automatically. So eventually these new coping mechanisms, these new ways of thinking, these new ways of dealing with feelings, all of those things actually become something that you rely on instead of something that you have to consciously work at so hard. But think about watching a kid learn to walk. And since my youngest granddaughter just learned to walk recently, look at all the focus they put in that. Most of us don't even think about that anymore, so it becomes part of us. So today we're looking at my ICEBERG model of dealing with, it does deal a lot with our self-worth, which we talked about last time, but also how we learn to deal with our emotions. So what we're usually seeing with a lot of people, so here's my iceberg. You always hear about the tip of the iceberg. What most people are doing is walking around in this state of this reactive state, the word reactive is over there, this reactive state of anger, resentment, and then that's where you get the symptoms, the defenses, and the bad behavior showing up. So this is a very reactive state. And this is where on the top, this water looks very turbulent. So it might be like, man, life's falling apart, everything's bad, and their thoughts are just going crazy, and there's all this stuff, and there's all this stress. It's that turbulence. And if you take this as the whole picture, and you say, well, you don't understand, I have to act like that, I have to do those things, I have to be stressed all the time, there's no other way. It's because your little boat's float, getting whipped around on top of those waves, but you're not saying, whoa, guess what's way underneath here? You got a lot of still water underneath there, and eventually if you go all the way to the bottom of the ocean, you hit the bedrock, right? You hit the center of the earth, you hit that core, and that's what we're calling your core value self, your core worth. That's bedrock. That's foundational. That's that solid place. So we call that the truth at the very center of you. So you got to really work hard to dive down and get to that bedrock. It's not going to just, get dusted on your, head with fairy dust when the tooth fairy comes by. So beneath this angry, reactive, resentful, symptom-filled, and some of the symptoms can include some mental health stuff, depression. Often is ways of thinking that you've gotten so ingrained in it, and it keeps you in that mode, and it actually decreases your serotonin. And then if you use substances that increase your dopamine, now you're setting yourself up for depression, right? So that's a big, huge symptom that a lot of people have. So the negative behaviors, I can't help myself, all those kinds of things. So that's why we always say anger and resentment, even though it's an emotion, it's what we call a secondary or a surface emotion because it covers up, or a cover-up emotion. It covers up what's beneath all those waves. And what it's covering up is these core hurts. So I get angry because I feel danger, fear, risk, and people go, well, what danger is there? It might be danger to my ego self. My ego self is on the line. And my ego self will say, hey, I don't want to get taken down here, right? So it might be my ego self that's on the line. It's not just danger, fear, or risk of other things, or real life or death things. And in fact, in modern life, that danger, fear, or risk is much more associated with emotional vulnerability and the ego wanting to keep this shell of a self, this false self-image going, than it is with things like grizzly bears or saber-toothed tigers or genuine risk of death. And remember, that's what anger is really meant for, is to mobilize us to, do that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. So core hurts. Well, core hurts are below the surface. And below them, when we dig really down deep and we can heal these core hurts, when we heal the core hurts, we don't need the anger anymore. And also, if we deal with the core hurts, and partly how we heal those core hurts is by re-engaging with our core value, which is that bedrock way at the bottom. Now, a couple comments before we go into what exactly the core hurts and the core value statements are. And some of this is from Compassion Power too, so people will notice that working in, but we do it a little bit differently in here than in there. Notice that on the other side here, in this, in this water that sometimes, it's smooth down at the bottom, but sometimes it's swirling up here, we have experience, emotion, and stories. Now, our experience determines our perspective. That's why kids have a way different perspective on things than adults a lot of times. Like for kids, a hailstorm is often a traumatizing event because they haven't lived through a lot of them. So their perspective is how big and scary that is. Versus us, we might go, oh man, there's another ding in my car, or there's an insurance claim, or whatever the deal is. But experience determines perspective. Now think about that. What does that mean for you? Well, if I grew up with the experience of having these core hurts put on me, these core hurts are things like made to feel unimportant, not valuable, not seen, not heard. There's no loyalty, there's no trust, there's not honesty, there's all those kinds of things. If I grow up and my perspective is, my experience is, well, kid, we take care of you because we have to, but you're not that great. Or you just feel like, well, no one really wanted me to have that part of myself. Then your perspective is going to be like, hey, the world is not a good place. I can't trust people. I shouldn't feel good about myself. I'm never enough, right? So experience determines perspective. The next one is emotions, and I put the arrow there. Emotions are meant to be energy in motion. They move through us. Remember, there's bodily sensations, hot, cold, loose, tight, numb, tingly, all those things that kind of give us cues. And then there's emotions like, sad or joyful or nervous or, I'm trying to remember what this one kid used to say. Nerve-whacking. He would say someone was nerve-whacking because he had a speech impediment. But whatever those feelings are, right, all those feelings are meant to live in us. But they're meant to be energy in motion. We're not supposed to get stuck in them, right? Even if you've lost someone, even in the grieving process. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said, boy, people really messed with it thinking, oh, there's 5 stages to everything. And she was really talking about specific things with those stages of grief. And really, she said people move in and out of them. Because, see, even if you're grieving the loss of someone, there's still moments. I mean, you might be at a funeral and be laughing, right? Because you're telling funny stories about the person and all that kind of stuff. So emotions are supposed to give us this real-time update on what's going on with us. And then we can work with them. And so energy and motion. Emotions are what gives our lives meaning and motivation. So think about it. I mean, I know a lot of people in here take parenting too. And if I asked you, I'd say, how many of you men and women like kids? And a lot of you say, I like kids. I really like kids. How many of you like your kids more than other kids, right? They have more meaning for you because you were entrusted with them, and you're watching them, get born or carrying them inside of you, and then you're watching them, eat those first few days. And you're getting up with them all the time, and you're watching them learn to walk and talk and all those things. So they have more meaning for us. Emotions are what give our life meaning. Without emotions, and when you think about people who are on the autism spectrum, like high-functioning Asperger's, Sheldon from Big Bang, anybody? The writer said, no, we didn't write him like that, but the Jim Parsons who played him said, yeah, I played him like a high-functioning Asperger's. They don't always get feelings. And see, feelings are what gives us that connection and that bond. And when you miss that, it often, it kind of skews your view of the world. So people who struggle with knowing what emotions are often have trouble relating to other people, because that's how we That's how we bond, right? It's partly through sharing emotions. And remember, your emotions don't have to match someone else's emotions. You might have very different emotional reactions to the same situation. So that's why, there's often in relationships, whether it's families or co-workers or friends or spouses, it's not what is the reality. We have to decide on one reality. It's, hey, what's my reality? What's your reality? What's our reality? Is there some way we can have all this fit together, right? Because, and it's that emotional reality that you have to take into account. So, if you've got, say you got a spouse who is petrified of going to the dentist, all your little talks in the world about, hey, the dentist isn't that bad, and remember last time, and they can give you laughing gas, and it doesn't matter. Being supportive of them doesn't just say like, well, that's just stupid. That's not the reality. Dentists aren't scary, because for some people, dentists are very scary. Now, dentists would disagree with me. They're like, we're not scary. We're great people, right? So again, that's that reality thing. It gives us meaning. Emotions also give us motivation, right? It's our emotional thing. And it's not just people who say, oh yeah, we try to get away from pain and we seek pleasure. But humans are more complicated than that. Yes, we do seek pleasure, but we also seek pleasure in the long term. So it's not just about instant gratification, because a lot of times things that are instantly gratifying do not serve our long-term best interest. So that's why people, some of you guys work out, right? And I had one guy who said every minute of working out was pleasurable for him. He's either lying or crazy, but but even that, think about it. You go through that momentary discomfort for the long-term pleasure that gives you, and those feelings of pride when you get there motivate you to keep on, right? So emotions give us motivation as well. Now, the final one on this side over here is underneath the water, there's all these stories. We tell ourselves stories all the time. We're stuck in our stories all the time. We often replay stories over and over. And often, no matter what situation we end up in, we come up with a story that fits our narrative, right? So, if we're someone who's like, man, things never go right for me, right? We're going to find instances where things don't go right for us because that fits in our old story. Human beings are meaning makers. We make meanings of things all the time. Why'd that guy cut me off? You guys all know this answer. I'm working on it. Now, I have to say I'm not doing this, well, I'm actually doing really well right now because I'm not on the road. But, my story is Subaru drivers are crappy drivers, right? So every time I see a Subaru driver do something stupid, it adds to my meaning making about that situation. So what I need to do is start looking around for Subaru drivers who are just driving down the road normally, right? And if I did that, I would probably see that the majority of Subaru drivers are actually good drivers. But right now I'm looking for the things that match my story, the meaning I've given it to it. And that's why an old therapy question, which Brene Brown has made big, and she is a social worker, so you gotta love her for that, is this idea of, well, the story I'm telling myself about this is, or the story I'm making up is, and check out your stories with other people. And a lot of Fortune 500 companies now are doing that all day long in all their meeting stuff. They say, hey, the story I'm telling myself is da-da-da-da-da. And they're like, hey, well, the story I'm telling myself is, so that we see each other's perspectives. And it's like we've done this exercise in class, and some of you guys went back and did it that night. You must have done 12 drawings that night. It was hilarious. You brought them back in to show me. And we have two of you sit back to back. And I hand one of you a nonsense picture. It's got some shapes and stuff, but it's not really a picture of anything in particular. And then the other guy is sitting there with a blank piece of paper, and I say, the job is for the first person to describe that picture and have the second person draw it. You go, hey, we can do this. And then I say, here's the thing. No talking. No sounds. No asking questions. Did you mean this or this? Big or small? No asking questions. Nothing. Just you say what you have in front of you, and you draw it. And then we look at those two. And it's interesting because, see, what we're trying to do is, how can you, the person who has the picture in front of them, that's my internal reality. And because I can see it and I'm living with it, I think it's pretty obvious. But when I describe it to the other person, they may not get it, right? And that's why we need these tools that help us bridge that gap. That's where emotions come in, and that's where empathy comes in. And that's where the ability to regulate your own emotions comes in. Because I can listen to someone else's perspective so that I can look at it with curiosity. I'm going to try to understand what the picture is like in their head. Now then we ask them the second round, what would have made it easier to draw that picture? And the person says, if I could have asked them questions. Hey, is the paper, landscape or portrait? Does that eyeball shape take up most of the page or only a corner of the page? When you say there's some stairs, steps leading somewhere, is that on the right side or the left side? These are all those things, that curiosity and that engagement and that kind of figuring things out. It's like, hey, let me get into your world a little bit. Intimacy is intimacy. But that also helps us when we say, hey, maybe the stories I've been making up are just one story, and I need to say, hey, what's that about? And here's the thing about the emotions, the experience, and the stories that are off to the side there. Even if you might be out of touch with these, you might have stuffed your feelings down so far under the water that you don't really access them well. Even if you don't have easy access to your emotions, they are still broadcasting to the world. It comes through. All those things don't just go away. So that shamefulness that you feel, that shame that you feel sometimes, that inadequacy that you feel sometimes, the fact that you flip into one of those core hurts, oh, I'm not really that important, or, whatever that is, that stuff gets broadcast to other people and people pick up on it, even though you're trying not to. So some of that really does leak to the surface. That's why it's much better to bring those out into awareness. Do feeling. Remember we talked in the COVID video with the parenting about the kids. Do feeling check-ins several times a day. What am I feeling? And if it says like, a lot of times people kind of disguise thoughts as feeling. Well, I feel like they should call my people on time to class every time. Is there a place in my body I can feel they should call people on time to my class every time? No, that's a thought. That's a desire. I want them to call people to my class on time. I get frustrated when they don't call people to my class on time. Now, frustrated is a feeling, right? It's a mild form of anger that says, because what I want to do, my goal is to have my classes, right? So I feel frustrated in that effort. So feelings, look for feeling words. Good exercise while you're sitting there. You got a lot of time now, right? Lots of time. Start a feeling list. Put feelings on the list. And if you're not sure, put them on and look at them later or run them by other people, right? They can be some form of sad. They can be some sort of mad, glad, scared, curiosity, contempt, all those kinds of things. So lots of different feelings. And really get in touch with, checking in with yourself on an emotional level. What am I feeling? Because once you know how to identify your feelings, then you can manage them. If you're just stuffing them down, say, oh, I don't have any feelings, right? Or that generic one, I'm fine, right? It's like, wow, that's not really a feeling. That's usually an I don't know what my feelings are. So, now, the other thing is, a little aside on here is often, down here, we often have our public self. Now, sometimes our public self looks angry and whatever, but we might put on, our behavior might be a real nice one to certain people, but negative to other people. But we have that public, that's our false self-image that we often present. We often have a private self, right? And a private self, people who are really in touch with their core value self are very much alike in public and private. They can identify their feelings in public. They can identify their feelings in private. They don't come across as fake. They don't need to change who they are based on where they are, right? This is not a person who you're going to be like, wow, she's so nice when she's at church, but man, she's really horrible when she's, out with her girlfriends. Or, this is the, behind closed doors, like, wow, that person just looks like the pillar of society. They look so nice, but man, have you heard how that person talks to their kids, right? So that's that public-private. And the more a person genuinely has integrity, and integrity means that wholeness, the more integrity you have, the more your public and private self is really kind of the same. Now, your private self might be a little more like, hey, I'm not going to share everything that's going on with everybody because that is private. That's meant for my family, the people close to me, my friends, maybe some of my neighbors, right? So there are levels of intimacy. That's different. But that you're the same person. And I think for people who've seen the Invictus movie with us, that really shows with Nelson Mandela, right? When he went to lead the country, he wasn't just saying, here, we're going to enter this truth and reconciliation in public, but in private, I'm horribly. He treated people in his household staff, and he treated people who worked in the government the same way he was encouraging South Africans to treat the whole process. So that's that integrity and that public-private self matching. Now, the problem is when someone has a secret self. There's that old saying, we have a lot of them. They're only as sick as your secrets. That secret self is often the sign of real insecurity. And that it's often associated with narcissism, but that word gets thrown around so much lately. There's a whole narcissistic spectrum. You could be a genuine narcissist, and really there's not a, unfortunately it's one of those things we can't do a lot with. But then there's people who have narcissistic features. And the interesting thing is addiction often makes you look pretty narcissistic. That's that selfishness, that getting caught in ego, because addiction says it's all about me. Remember, your hijacked brain says, my goal is not to keep you alive, my goal is to keep the addiction alive. So the addiction becomes very selfish. And that's why people will go like, wow, I realized I was hitting my bottom when I couldn't lower my standards fast enough to keep up with what I was doing. Right? So people say, oh, man, yeah, I'll do this, but I wouldn't do that. And they're like, I'd never steal from my grandma. And then they find themselves stealing from grandma or whatever. So that secret self, that part that's like, keeping everything under wraps, that's often that blame shifting, that defensiveness, and that often goes with addictions. But again, as you start to work on this, and this is not to put you in shame about that, it's to say you can't change what you don't acknowledge. So if I can work on that and get back to my core value self, I'm in good shape. So, bedrock, core value, core word, the thing that's at the center of you. And this is why I want you doing some kind of mindfulness every day, checking in with your emotions every day, and really looking at yourself. What is that part of me at the center of me that's the truth, that is valuable, worthy, lovable, important, right? This is your birthright. This is who you are. And then when you're in touch with that, that will help you regulate these core hurts. Someone can treat me as if I'm unimportant. And I might get hurt, right? That might hurt me for a minute, but how I'm going to regulate that instead of going off on them and doing the reactive anger thing, I can be proactive and say, wow, what's going on with me? And you can also acknowledge, is there a piece of truth in what someone's saying? Now they might say it horribly and it might not all be true, but if there's a piece of truth, I can go, oh, that's a piece of truth in that. I tend to be late all the time. So you know what? I need to work on that punctuality. But the part about me being a totally unreliable employee, I am not an unreliable employee. I show up, actually I'm pretty on time most of the time, but I like that example because I have known some people who that's kind of their thing, right? That latency. But I have other things, right? Like I can get in the past especially, I would get too perfectionistic. It had to be perfect before I would do it. And I was like, I'm never going to get anything done. Like these videos, they don't have to be perfect. My humanity is, I'm going to mess up sometimes. Well, we'll just move on. I'll strive to do better. I'll strive to do my best. But I know that even if I screw up a video, it's not the end of the world and it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. Or what, think of a million different examples. The more congruent you are with your core value self, the more you get to experience genuine pride and power. Because see, if I know at my core, I'm valuable, worthy, lovable, important, powerful, and then I act in congruent ways, that means I act as a powerful, worthy, lovable human being, I'm going to get this positive feedback loop going, and it's like, yeah, I match. My insides and my outsides match. I'm not always in trying to cover up, right? Like, oh shit, they're going to find out the truth about me, right? Because the truth about you is really good. And there's that Marianne Williamson thing that gets credited to Nelson Mandela, even though he didn't say it. And I recently found out he didn't even read it at his inauguration, so I need to take that off of my copy of it. I knew it wasn't his, but I thought he had read it at his inauguration about, the truth is not that you are too little. The truth is that you are really actually enough, right? So I will get that out to you when we get back to. So, from this place, this bedrock of core value, you know who you are, and you acknowledge that other people are this too. You don't get to say, at my core, I'm valuable, worthy, lovable, and important. But those other fools out there, they're all assholes just waiting to get me, right? No, it's like we all have that part. Now, some people have covered it up so much, they don't even know it's there anymore. So this is the part where I'm not a Pollyanna. People go like, well, what about Hitler? What about, Saddam Hussein? What about that guy who killed his kids and his wife, out in Weld County? They have gotten so far away from knowing their core value, from being in touch with their core value, that I don't think we can bring them back. So what do we do with people like that? We contain them. We do not let them out in public, right? Not fit for human consumption. This is like No, because, like the guy who killed his pregnant wife and his kids, if you can violate that internal boundary, that we protect those we love, to such an extent, you're missing some major pieces of that, and we don't have the technology to get you back there. Now, in a contained situation, some of those people do very well. Remember that the Compassion Power class I teach, that was originated in a federal penitentiary that had lots of people with multiple life sentences, so it was maximum security. So we get that, but most people in here, we're talking about, no, this part may have been buried, it may have been lost, and that may have started happening from a young age. See, if you grew up in a healthy home, you didn't get so many, the core hurts were mild, little dings in the armor. Yeah, you still got hurt, things still happened, little things in the armor, but you came through it because you had parents who empathized, parents who supported your emotions, parents who stuck to firm limits when they needed to. They didn't do either the be too soft on you, oh, not my baby, or the be too hard on you, right? They had that good middle ground and did it well most of the time. And if you grew up in a community where you got acknowledgement and you didn't look different than other people or whatever the deal is, that you might have, it might be easy to say, oh yeah, I acknowledge those core hurts when they happen and I just move right to my core value self and I can really change my behaviors to be how they want and I don't have these symptoms and defenses of depression and hopelessness and all of that. But for a lot of people, you started out where you didn't get a lot of that nurturing, so you're going to have to rebuild that self. So keep coming back to bedrock here. When you come back into this place, this bedrock place, you can translate your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations, your behaviors into this behavior of caring for yourself and caring for others. Right? Care of self and others comes out of that bedrock place. When I know that I'm valuable, worthy, lovable, important, and other people are too, I can have everything aligned to go that direction. So, final thing on this video, we're getting right up to the wall here, how to put these ideas into practice. Get curious about, learn from, and appreciate differences while also looking for similarities. You're talking to some woman down in the pod, right? Some other gal in the pod, and I usually say guys for everybody, but get curious about them. Get curious. It doesn't have to match your perspective, right? Appreciate those differences. But also look for similarities. Hey, we may be really different and we both love our kids, or whatever the deal is. Don't compare or judge differences. Don't do that one up, one down. Oh, I'm better than you because of this. Oh, I'm worse than you because of this. Really look for, and notice, this is going to be a hard one because our culture is very competitive. It says go to one up, one down. So try to stay out of one up, one down. Take influence from a position of self-worth versus just defending your false image, right? So that's why in class I really, I don't use street names for people. I don't want to keep adding to that false image self. So take influence from this position of self-worth. And people who can take influence are not weak. We all need to take influence because we're humans, right? We're learning all the time, hopefully till your deathbed. Now, I don't care what other people think is not a statement of self-worth, but a defensive stance. Because you don't say, well, I don't care what other people think, this is just who I am. It's not about not caring what other people think. It's not caring about what people who don't matter think. Because the people who matter to you, you should care what they think. Because those are the people close to you. So I even have a quote to finish off with that today. But, now, if there's someone who is just like the Kardashians or whatever, I don't care what the Kardashians think of me because they don't matter in my life, right? I don't care what Kanye West thinks of me. That's what we mean when we say don't care about what the cheap seat people, Brene Brown calls them. Don't care about what those people think, maybe on social media. And it's weird how in our culture we've often flipped it now. People care more what acquaintances and strangers think than what their family thinks. Right? They're like, oh, my family will love me no matter what, but I care about making a good impression on these people out here. Flip that around. Flip that around. So my quote for the day is, don't let people who don't really matter in your life matter in your life. So if these people don't really matter, Kim Kardashian doesn't matter to me, don't make her opinion on things matter. Or don't make, the clerk at the grocery store or a neighbor that you hardly ever see. Big deal. I'm not going to take something they say over something my kid says, for instance. So don't let people who don't really matter to your life matter in your life. And remember that it's not your self-worth that changes. It's your awareness of your self-worth that changes. Your self-worth is always there. Dig down, find it, become aware of it. Because when you're not aware of it, that's when you often are much more likely to slip into resentment, anger, symptoms, defenses, and bad behavior. So we're kind of done with this section on connection and autonomy. We'll still mention it, but we're kind of done with that. And we've looked at boundaries, communication, self-worth, and we've looked at this whole idea of what's really at your core. Thanks. We'll see you soon.